Welcome to Off Panel.
Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the cartoonist behind the upcoming By Chance of Providence re-release, as well as the writer of The Punisher and Southern Cross. It's Becky Cloonan. Thanks for coming on, Becky.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So, while there are a bevy of things I want to talk about, we're here to discuss By Chance of Providence and its upcoming color re-release. The Image is dropping July 26th. And before we jump into that, I do want to say for listeners, By Chance of Providence is a collection of mini comics that Becky did. Wolves, The Mire, and Demeter. And they're excellent. You should get it when it comes out. But I want to talk about the original stories and kind of how those developed. What made you first want to dive into self-publishing your own comics with Wolves?
It was kind of a while ago, and actually the whole thing coincided with a few different events. One was I was going to Japan, I think in like 2009, so this is a while ago, and maybe it was 2010. It was a bunch of friends, and we were going to this comic convention called Comitia, and we wanted to publish like a little doujinshi kind of comic over there. And that was, Wolves started out as a comic for that, and I think it was shorter. It was, mostly the same thing. And then when I got back, I kind of had this idea floating around in my head and these characters. And I was just waiting for scripts for Killjoys. It was kind of the thing. And I was doing a bunch of licensed work at the time and some, one issues off here and there. And it was kind of just a way to fill in the time and kind of practice my writing a little bit and kind of get this, like, exercise this story that's been like living inside of me. Mm-hmm. So that it all kind of happened. It was like one thing led to another. And then I was like, I came from background of self-publishing. So after having not self-published for a while and then jumped back into it with a bunch of other work under my belt, it was a totally different experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that like the first print run for Wolves was like 1,000, and you ended up printing out 7,000, or at least at the time of this interview that I read with you. And you had experience with self-publishing, but I'm guessing you didn't have it to that scale. Possibly, were you figuring out? Were you figuring out a lot of this stuff as you were going on and being like, "How do I do this?"
Yeah, and a lot of it, I was doing so many conventions. I would do like 10 to 12 a year. I would do a couple every month. It was, because I had these comics that I was making, it became like, self-perpetuating. Like I'd make all these comics and then they'd be sitting inside my hallway and in my closets. And in order to get rid of them, I'd have to go to cons. But in order to go to cons, you kind of have to have something to sell,
right.
To make it financially viable. And so this was one of those things that just snowballed a little out of control. I opened up an online store when I still lived in New York, and I was going like once or twice to the post office every week with like hundreds of comics. And they were like, "Why don't you just like get an online program and print everything at home?" I was like, oh, okay. So this was all kind of like learning curve. Mm-hmm. And then when I moved up to Montreal, it became a little bit easier because we were able to do a bunch of that stuff in-house at the studio that I was working out of. So as I did each mini comic, I kind of learned a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah. It was, I think I'd still have a lot to learn if I went back to it.
Well, and it probably helped, in two ways. The fact that, because, when you moved to Montreal, you're at Lunac. And, mm-hmm. You had both, possibly, I'm not saying that everybody really wanted to help you, like, pack mailers or things like that, but you had more bodies in theory that might want to help out. And two, I mean, I know that Carl Kerschel was there, and he was self-publishing The Abominable Charles Christopher. Was having, like, other people to be able to lean on, did that help a lot in that process?
It totally helped. And Carl doing Charles Christopher was, like, when we started talking about it, then the guys at Lunac got involved, and they started doing the packaging for us for, they'd take a cut of it in order to fulfill everything. So they were basically acting as like a fulfillment service.
Mm-hmm.
And it helped out a lot, especially because everything was printed up there and then mailed out from it. The only problem was the Canadian mail, the postal service charged to ship back to the States.
Oh.
So, yeah. So that was like the one big problem, I guess. But it worked out for a time. It was really, really good up there.
Yeah.
While I was while I was stationed in Montreal, the Montreal years.
The Montreal years. So when you first started with Wolves, it sounded like it was kind of a product of opportunity meets desire. Like, you wanted to do something like that, and you had the chance because you're waiting for Killjoy's scripts to come in. But how did you decide to move on to like the Meyer and to Demeter?
Well, they just subsequently followed every year, and because I had done Wolves one year, the next year I was like, well, I guess I'll try another one because it's nice every new con season. It was always kind of nice to have something new to show because it's like if you just go with the same books, you're seeing the same people more or less, and then it's what are they going to buy? They can't just buy the same comic every year over and over. So it was. And each time I was trying to push myself to like do something a little bit different and a little bit new. Mm-hmm. So, it was just one of those things that it got a lot bigger than I had. At first I was just like, I want to do a comic about a werewolf. And now look at us now. Here we are.
I'm just trying to imagine what your home was like during the initial process with Wolves. Was it just like every available like space on the floor? Was it just covered with books?
It was like my closets were covered in comics. The way my apartment was set up was you could get to the living room through the kitchen or through a hallway. The hallway was completely full, so you had to go through the kitchen. If there was any cabinet space that was like below your waist, that was all comics. If like below my coffee table was propped up by comics, under my bed, it was like there's so many comics. I don't know if I could do that again, honestly.
Well, yeah.
And it helped because I had my own place, so it's like I'm not, no one else has to really worry about it. But
yeah, I mean, do you feel like I not to jump too far ahead, but one of the things I think is interesting is like you've released By Chance or Providence before. You released it in partnership with Lunac, and like I actually have my copy sitting right next to me. It's a great book. It's a beautiful book, but now it's coming back out of Image. Is part of the reason why you wanted to do that is just so you could kind of have like the infrastructure so you could avoid that to a certain degree?
To a degree. And I think when I did the hardcover release a few years ago, it was a much smaller, I think we did like 5,000 and like half of them were in French. Mm-hmm. So, and that's just because we could print the same cover. Like the cover doesn't have any words on it. So we just did a different slip case, the cover, the little thing that
the dust jacket or whatever together.
The dust jacket, and then the French interiors, I guess. But doing it with Image allows me to reach like everybody, like bookstores and comic stores. We had there was a lot of comic stores that ordered this book from me.
Do you mean originally, like the books, the comic stores are ordered originally on the hardcover?
Yeah. We had a lot of comic stores order wholesale from me, which was why we were able to print so much, like in the beginning. Mm-hmm. But then the problem was that when you're selling wholesale, you're really not making too much money, like per book, because it costs so much to make a hardcover graphic novel. It just I can't get into bookstores. It's nice doing the paperback edition because I'm able to reach like a huge audience, not just people who were familiar with my work in the first place. I think a lot of people who bought the book originally had been a big fan enough to like go out of their way to like special order it and stuff, which I really, really appreciate. So
I just think it is kind of amazing that you had this 5,000 print run and you were able, I mean, I imagine you sold through it fairly quickly.
I sold out of it in like a month.
What?
It was crazy. Yeah, it was nuts. And then I was like, I should have printed more. But by then I was like so tired of doing all this that I just couldn't, and then thinking of reprinting it was like, I'll just wait until I do a paperback edition.
I do think that's the amazing thing though, is like, when you originally did it, it was because you had a gap. But after that, you've been pretty busy. It's not like you haven't been doing other things on top of the Meyer and on top of Demeter and on top of the release of By Chance or Providence. So it was like you had this entire other job on top of your other jobs.
Yeah, and that was fine for a while. It got to a point, I was traveling so much when I was up in Montreal to try to, get the work visa and stuff worked out, but which didn't end up happening. So I was in and out of Canada all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's harder to maintain something like that and to like really self-publish more. And then I was burnt out on travel. Mm-hmm. I was doing so many conventions, which I got really tired of. Mm-hmm. So I just needed a break from the whole thing. And I'm down in Austin now, and I've kind of I've got people who do fulfillment for me here. So the option kind of has come up again. If I ever want to do another mini comic, it's totally possible. So it's been rolling around in my head.
I do think like the idea of, you were saying earlier about how mini comics and having something different at each con, like so you're not just selling the same thing to the same people over and over, because eventually that audience just dissipates. One thing I really love in comics lately is how many people are kind of doing merchandise, and like they're doing enamel pins, and they're doing like like little prints that they're posting, or that they're selling at the cons and everything like that. And I know that's not totally new, but I do kind of feel like in the past few years there's been like a step up, like a next level with that. And I think the mini comics is a perfect example of that. Like having something, you have to have something that makes your table stand out and has something that you can only get here to really draw the attention of people. And I have to say, having an Eisner Award winner at your table is probably a pretty good draw.
It's not so bad. And it's great that everything's like, merchandising and doing stuff like that is so much easier now. It's like more affordable,
Yeah, I was actually talking to, I don't remember who it was. I was talking to somebody about enamel pins on my podcast, and we were talking about...
that's a thing.
it's crazy. Like, I think one of the main reasons why so many people are doing it is apparently they're very inexpensive to make. And so you can actually make a mint pretty quickly. Maybe...
Yeah, it's not to give away like too many trade secrets, I guess, but it's not difficult to find pin manufacturers. And it's, if you sell a pin for $10 and they cost $2 to make, then or $2.50 or whatever, you're making way more money off a pin than you would off a comic book. Because if I'd sold my mini comic, my mini comics are like, 28 pages or whatever, and they're black and white, and I might spend a few bucks printing each one, but I can't sell them for $10 each. I've got to sell them for like $5, because no one's going to pay that much money for a comic for whatever reason, even though there's way more effort goes into, a comic than like an enamel pin. But for some reason the pins are worth 10 and the comics are 5. It's just, and the comics are like way heavier. You have to like lug them around. It's like, how many suitcases full of comics have I like lugged across the world? Ugh.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I'm ready to just not do that anymore. So I welcome the enamel pin craze with open arms.
Yes. So to go way back, you did Wolves, you did the Meyer, you did Demeter, and then you decided to do By Chance or Providence. How was that? Just like kind of a natural continuation? You're like, I have these 3 books, I can collect them, I can make it a bigger thing. How did you decide you wanted to do that?
Yeah, it was when it came to like the following year after I did Demeter, and I was like, I just don't know if I have time or like the energy to do another one, even though I've got more ideas. Just, because each one would take about 3 months to do, because I'd be working on it on top of other work. So, you only get to do a few pages a week. And so putting the collection together made a lot of sense, because I just, I wasn't sure when I'd be able to get another one done. So, why not collect it now and, see what happens later. If I ever make more, I'll figure it out.
Sure.
People can just buy the new trade with the 5-part trilogy.
The 5-part trilogy. I like it. I like you were saying about how it's like you have other ideas. I think that's one of the interesting things is like, for you, or really any creator, I'm guessing the problem is rarely ideas. The problem is typically time.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you'll have a new idea like every other day. So it's hard to be precious about ideas when I just keep getting new ones. But I still, there's, with the story Wolves, it's so old, but I've got 2 other stories with those characters that one day I'd like to do that kind of complete the story, in its entirety. And I just don't know when. It's the time thing is difficult.
Yeah. Okay, so By Chance or Providence is coming out at Image. We mentioned that already, but I wanted to ask, the first volume, all the mini comics were black and white. The original version of By Chance or Providence is black and white. Why did you decide to go with color, and what made Lee Lowridge the right fit for it?
Well, Lee colors Southern Cross, so I've, even though I haven't worked with him on my art, he's been working with Andy, and seeing how he handles that and just mood, and he has a really, his colors are really bold, but at the same time, it's kind of a subtle touch, because he's not trying to like add things that aren't there. And I felt like with my mini comics, it's black and white, and each one had like 1 or 2 shades of gray. So with the shadows kind of already done, I was like, it really just needs someone to go in and like lay a palette down. And I think part of it was doing a soft cover. I wanted to like offer something completely new, and adding the colors gives it a totally different reading experience. It's really it's different.
I have to admit, going from I read the new version, and then I went back to my black and white version, and it was interesting. It's like there's gonna be an interesting compare and contrast you can do if you have both versions, because it does change. It changes the feel of the story a little bit, for me at least.
Yeah, and I got Rachel Deering to re-letter it.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
That changes things too, because she really went in and cleaned it up, and it took my crappy Photoshop lettering and like did it all really nice in Illustrator, and the bubbles were already in place, so she kind of just took it and then went in and made some words boldface, and it was just had a really nice subtle touch to it that just cleans the whole thing up and makes it look a little more professional. It's like went from being these little mini comics that are like a little bit scrubby to really nicely produced paperback.
And I do want to compliment you on the inside and the inside covers with the unicorns and the snakes and the wolves and everything. I think those are beautiful. I love those.
Thank you. Yeah, that was like the first pattern I've ever done. So hopefully I'd like to do more. I'm talking with people about doing leggings and, maybe some, different kind of textile stuff. So it was fun. I would do more.
I do think it's really cool how you're being able to do this new version where it's like, you have Rachel relettering it, you have Lee doing colors, and then you get to kind of add all these details that you didn't really have the first time because, you were kind of putting the thing together as you had time. Is it nice to be able to kind of reapproach By Chance or Providence and do it the way that you might have wanted to do it to begin with?
Yeah, and I don't know. It's kind of weird because the way it was like in the hardcover and the original mini comics, I don't think I would change anything.
Sure.
I think that they're exactly what I wanted to do at the time, and the new version is kind of like a new incarnation of it that just made sense. This is the way things change over time, and to bring it to a bigger audience. And talking to Eric Stevenson at Image, he loves color. And so even though this book was already in black and white, it was like, for the wider audience, it just made sense to do it this way. So it's just a new, incarnation of material that I was, happy with then, but now I'm even more happy with it.
I think it's going to be really cool to see it roll out to bookstores and everything because, somebody who I really like is I love Emily Carroll's work.
Oh,
And
she's my favorite.
she's so good. Through the Woods is honestly Into the Woods. Did I mix it up? Was it Through the Woods or Into the Woods?
It's Through the Woods.
Okay.
I'm looking at it right now.
I love her stuff, and like I think I ended up stumbling across it in a bookstore. I think it was like Barnes and Noble, and it was like this beautiful book, and I was just like, I need this. I need to buy this. And I feel there's like a discoverability element to bookstores where, By Chance or Providence could get picked up by like the right person, and the next thing you know, you have like this entirely new fan who discovered you through bookstores.
Yeah, and that was a big thing about doing it through Image, was just the visibility.
Mm-hmm. So this is the random question I warned you about beforehand. I would say that the thing that makes me saddest about the newest version is the fact that you do not have the same dedication, because the initial dedication, the one in the first volume, is the most charming thing I've ever read, because you thank Guy Davis for the toaster oven. And
Oh, yeah.
I love that. Like, I first off, like, this is like a random thing to bring up on a podcast, but I'm like, I love toaster ovens. Toaster ovens are amazing. I'm sure you don't want to go too deep into it. What is the story behind that? I've always thought that is like the best.
Okay, so Guy Davis, he is one of my favorite artists, and we've never had the pleasure of meeting in person, but he'll send me like if he does new art books, he'll send them to me, and when I do new comic books, I send them over to him. And 1 year for my birthday, he sent me like a little octopus encased in resin, and so we go back and forth. And one year when I was in New York, and I was I don't remember what it was. I think I was lamenting on Twitter that I didn't have a toaster because I was afraid that like cockroaches would live inside of it. Because there were just cockroaches all over my building. It wasn't like it's just New York. That's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to make toast in the broiler if I wanted toast, or like on the stovetop. And he's like, you don't have a toaster oven? And I was like, no. And so he just one day just sent me, I got a box from Amazon, and it was this like ridiculous, amazing Black & Decker toaster oven from Guy Davis that he had just like bought me on Amazon. So that was amazing.
That is amazing. Did the toaster oven power you through the experience of making those mini comics?
I made everything in that toaster oven from then on. Like I didn't even use the oven. Like if it fit in the toaster oven, I like made it, like pies, like small chickens, like I just everything in the toaster oven.
My wife and I recently bought a house, and one of my friends back, I don't even remember when it was, she bought me a toaster oven because, or no, actually, I think I was introduced to toaster ovens by my friend, and then my mom bought me a toaster oven because I was like obsessed with toaster ovens after that. And
they're great.
Yeah, they're incredible. And after we moved into, my wife and I moved into our new home, like I'm like very good at like getting rid of stuff. Like I'm not a hoarder at all. I'm very
Oh,
like,
me too. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I can cut ties really easily. But for some reason, even though we didn't have space for it and we still don't have it anywhere, I kept the toaster oven because I'm like, I might need this to like make, to like make tuna melts or something, because they make amazing tuna melts.
Tuna melts are so good.
They are, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm in. Okay.
Now we're both, after this call, we're both gonna have to go make toast or tuna melts for ourselves in toaster ovens.
I know. I don't have any bread
That's
or tuna. I've got none of the ingredients.
If you got cheese, you're part of the way there, though.
I'll have to look. Oh man.
Anyways, but yeah, I just always love that, and I was also also a huge fan of Guy Davis's art. I was just like, there has to be a pretty good story there. That's awesome.
Yeah. And the other part of the dedication was for Madeline, Madeline Pryor.
What?
From X-Men fame. Yeah, that was the other dedication. The whole dedication was for Madeline Pryor, yeah.
That is hilarious, because I saw that and I was like, wow, that has to be like this really deep poetic thing, and it's actually Madeline Pryor from the X-Men.
Which is, that's still deep and poetic to me. I get all.
Oh, it is.
I'm a Madeline Pryor sympathizer, of course, and I just feel really bad for her.
Well, you did just you had the Mondo poster, but that was Dark Phoenix. That wasn't Madeline Pryor.
That was Dark Phoenix, yeah.
You need to convince them to let you do a Madeline Pryor one.
I would do just a straight up Goblin Queen, man.
Yes, it's a great look.
Oh, it's so good. She was always one of my favorites since I was a kid, so this book was kind of for her.
Her and Guy Davis. Well, the new dedication is still great too. It's like, what is it? It's for all the people who fall in love with their characters. Yeah,
if you have crushes on your characters.
Do you have crushes on anybody in By Chance or Providence?
Oh yeah, like all of them. I feel like if you don't, you might be doing something wrong. I don't know. Like I end up with really strong feelings for them. Sometimes because part of it's because the stories are so short. They're like only 20 something pages long. I think Demeter might have been 30. I can't remember, but because you only have a short amount of time, you have to really get to know the characters. So I'd spend a lot of time drawing them in my sketchbooks, and that stuff is like supplemental material in the back of the book. There's like a lot of the sketches that I would do. So you get to know these characters really well, so that when you put them on the page, they like evoke all your feelings that you have for them. And hopefully that gets communicated with the reader, Like in The Mire, there's the shot when Owen sees Ellen for the first time, and she's only in the book for like 3 or 4 panels, and half the time she doesn't even look human, but like the other half the time she's just, she's there. And if I felt like if I didn't have that kind of feeling for her when I drew her, how would I convince the audience to fall in love with her just as much as, Owen falls in love with her? Like, it has to be convincing. The chemistry has to be there in order for me to feel, I have to feel that just as much as, if I didn't feel it, then the audience wouldn't feel it. So that's kind of.
Yeah, that makes total sense considering the fact that, it's like, if you don't have that, it's hard for that to transition over to us. If we just made up that relationship, it would be a little bit more difficult, I think. But I do think one of my favorite parts of the new version and the old version is that you included the mini comic where you saw the guy, where you thought you saw the guy from Wolves. Basically, he looked exactly like the guy from Wolves on the train.
That's a true story.
It's hilarious. It's so funny because I could see myself doing the exact same thing, and just you have to keep staring, otherwise it gets even weirder somehow.
Oh yeah, it's weird because if you don't stare and you look away, then you keep looking back, and that's weirder to me. Is the constant looking away and looking. If you just stare at somebody, you're probably a little less conspicuous, maybe.
My problem is I'm one of the people who does like the 1,000-yard stare, where it's just kind of like absent-mindedly looking forward, and then I'm like, oh, I've been staring at a human this entire time.
I didn't even realize it.
Oops, my bad. I'm not creepy, I swear. I was just kind of staring into space.
You're just having a look.
Exactly. So I want to talk about all of your writing jobs and everything. But I want to start with one thing that I think is really interesting about your current slate of work. Because you have, By Chance or Providence is being re-released. You have The Punisher and you have Southern Cross. And I know you're a big metal person. I find it really interesting that all three of your books feel like kind of like an old time version of metal, and then a present time version of metal, and then a future time version of metal. It's like your own personal metal trilogy.
That is a good way of looking at it. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I guess it's luck of the draw, I guess.
It's worked out. It's worked out.
Yeah. When I first started doing Southern Cross with Andy Belanger, he actually came to me with the idea of doing a future space horror, like science fiction. That was his idea, and like he had all this art ready to go. He's like, "Let's do it. We're doing it." I was like, "Okay, here we go."
I do have to say, when I think about Southern Cross, though, I think about kind of like a John Carpenter like synth for it more than I think of metal. Though I could see the metal, but I also think of the John Carpenter synth.
Oh yeah, it's way more synthy, I think, and a lot of that is like Andy's really, got this '80s kind of throwback technology stuff going on, and like the costumes, and he's really captured that like analog synth kind of feel
I
through
don't,
the art.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to give, I hate to be like, well, you're cool, but all of your collaborators are even more amazing.
They're all amazing.
Southern Cross is, I honestly think, one of the best looking comics out right now. Like Andy's stuff, especially in the first arc, when you guys would do those pages where it'd be like kind of touring different areas where he'd be walking through, like where people would be walking, or like Alex would be walking down tunnels and like ladders and things like that, and be connecting. Like those pages blew my mind.
Oh yeah, he's a complete like mad genius, like in like the mad scientist kind of way. Mm-hmm. And I kind of know, because I've known him for so long and we've worked together for a while. When I write a script, I kind of know what he's going to throw back at me.
Sure.
Just like, when I can kind of envision an Andy page in my head when I'm writing it, which I think is good because I'm able to play to his strengths when I write.
Right.
But then sometimes, like with that stuff, when he'd do like the Where's Waldo-esque looking shots of the ship, like double page spreads, I'm just like, whoa, this is crazy. This is, first of all, it's not what I wrote at all, but it doesn't even matter because it looks so cool. Mm-hmm. But like every once in a while he like does stuff like that, and I'm just like, you are completely insane, and I love it.
I did like an art feature with him. I think it was either like early last year, or like the year before, and I was trying really hard to not just be like, how did you do that, because that's awesome, over and over. And thankfully, I avoided that. I didn't want to go total Chris Farley show on him, but it is pretty amazing.
Yeah, he's incredible.
I'm curious, like, you were saying it does kind of change it a little bit, but, I mean, you guys are really good. You guys are best pals. How does that experience differ from, like, working with, like, Matt Horak on The Punisher, or, like, previously working with, like, Carl Kerschel on Gotham Academy? Like, how different is that experience?
Working with Carl was, Carl also is phenomenal. He's one of the best illustrators that I know, and an amazing cartoonist. Carl will just, when I did a page for him, I can't even think of how he's going to put it together, because his, the way he would like break down a page, it was always crazy. He would do like, if a character was ascending the stairs, he would do the page in a way where you read it like you were ascending the stairs, and it worked somehow. And it's so effortless. I'm sure it's a lot of effort for him, but it reads effortlessly, which is, I think the mark of an incredible storyteller. And, so I just never really worried about how he would compose a page, because his sensibilities and mine are, while we approach a scene in a similar way, like we look for like the emotional beats and like, try to mix it up between like close-ups and, long shots and mid shots and things. His sensibility for actually like what shots to use is completely different from mine. So I tried not to worry about it. I tried just to make sure that there weren't too many beats on a page, and I would just kind of give it to him and be like, there you go. And sometimes I would have an idea for panel layouts, and I would say like, oh, these are 3, panels from And I'd kind of explain it. And sometimes he would go with that, if it made sense, and sometimes he wouldn't. It was just, if I feel like I have a strong idea for a visual and how to lay out a page, sometimes I'll write that in. But I usually don't, because it's, the scripts are pretty self-explanatory. I don't do anything too crazy, I don't think. And Matt Horak, we actually just met for the first time at Idiot Fest like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yeah, and that he's phenomenal. He's like picked up where Steve Dillon, who is a legend, I can't even believe I got to work with Steve for as long as I did. And he picked it up and picked up the torch and just ran with it. And, we get on like a house on fire, which is awesome. Yeah. It's cool to be collaborating with someone for so long and then finally meet them and be like, oh man, we get along so well. Yeah, he's a rad dude.
I always find it really fascinating how, I don't think people think about it like this, but a lot of times the people who are working together, especially on Marvel or DC books, almost a lot of times they don't even meet each other. And actually being able to meet Matt, that is pretty cool, especially given the fact that it seems like you often work with your friends.
Yeah. No, I think with Gotham Academy, it worked out that way because we were all up in Studio Lunac in Montreal. So when I got the call from Mark Doyle to hey, do you want to pitch something? Everyone was right there. And I was like, yes, let's, rally the crew together. And with Andy, he was right there too. So working with Marvel was a little different. I think with DC, I got to pick the team because I was like, it was my idea. But with, with Punisher, they were just like, okay, we're going to put Steve Dillon on it. And I was like, no way. That is crazy. Me? No. I couldn't believe it for a really long time.
I mean, he is, for a lot of modern readers, he is the Punisher.
Yeah. And Preacher was that changed how I looked at comics, completely. Because I had read a bunch of Punisher Max stuff, but I wasn't the biggest Punisher fan. I liked Punisher War Journal growing up. And that's because I was a huge Jim Lee fan. I still am, but back in the day when I was picking up my monthly comics at the local comic shop as a teenager, that was the big stuff. But when I read Preacher, it changed my view of what comics could be,
Preacher is my favorite comic ever. And it's kind of funny because this was totally coincidental, but I entered, a lot of people have this 3 to 4 year window where they just stop reading comics for a bit and then they might come back to it. For me, I finished Preacher and I was like, I'm out. And I stopped reading for 3 or 4 years. And it was funny because you look at it and you're like, maybe part of my brain was it just can't get better than this. What am I going to go to after this? But eventually, obviously, I came back.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of do that sometimes with video games or with books. You finish something that you like a lot, and then you're like, okay, I just need to process this and let it sit. And I do that with comics too. I'll go for a year or so without, I'll go to the store and pick up some new number ones, but I don't read regularly as much as I used to.
I do think that is one of the weird things about the monthly format is the fact that you can, you pick up one and then you finish it and then you pick up another one and you finish it. And it's you almost don't really have time to sit and digest because of it. It's there's almost a binge element to it. Not that I have a problem with this single issue form, but it is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's weird. It's, it is a blessing and a curse, more of a curse, I think. And some of that is, Gotham Academy, we had some problems because, it's got a big young adult audience. It is a young adult book. And kids would read it a lot of times in trade form because they weren't going to comic stores or picking it up, on a monthly basis. And that was difficult because our monthly sales were not showing what the trade sales were doing.
Right.
And it's frustrating to kind of have to, you're battling this, it's an uphill battle, I guess, or something. You're just trying to convince, your editors at DC and everyone at DC, just this book is really good and it's selling in the trades, but yes, our monthly sales aren't good. And everyone cares about monthly sales so much for whatever reason. And I just don't understand.
Yeah.
I don't understand. because the trade sales, that's like where the book has the longevity, and that's where it has the shelf life. Having number ones is exciting and new and everything. And I like putting out like Southern Cross every month in like an issue, and it's exciting, you know. Every month you got something new on the shelf, but it's just exhausting, and it doesn't make any sense because most people just wait for the trade anyway.
Yeah, I mean, especially for, like you were saying with Gotham Academy, it's a YA audience. I know the reason why this doesn't happen more often, but I always kind of thought that Gotham Academy would have done really well in like a digest size, kind of like manga style. And part of that was because I know that a lot of shops don't like that. It doesn't fit their setup well. But I kind of feel like if you're like in a Barnes and Noble and you could kind of stash that next to like the manga and everything like that, I feel like that would work really well. And
That's exactly what Runaways did.
Yeah, exactly.
And Runaways is phenomenal. I mean, that's like kind of a benchmark for, you know, big two young adult publishing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually have, like, I still have only the Runaways in digest form, and I kind of wish I saw that more often. I know why they don't, but I wish that like they would release maybe like a book market only version if it doesn't work for retailers. But I don't know. That's a different story for another time. But
yeah, we'll see. I mean, we're right now Gotham Academy is kind of taking a break,
sure,
because we're wrapping up the whole story. This is like everything that we pitched from the beginning. So you know, it's not really, the book isn't canceled necessarily. We've just told everything that we have to tell, and now we're going to regroup and start thinking about like, okay, what's, you know, when we come back to it, if we come back to it, you know, the ball's in DC's court, so we're not, you know, we don't have much to say.
Sure.
But, you know, if it happens, what format are we going to take? You know, how are we going to, I don't think it'll be a monthly book again.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, that makes it kind of exciting. So
absolutely.
We'll see.
Well,
we'll see.
I want to ask about the Punisher again, because I read in another interview that you did that you said that writing the Punisher was one of the most challenging books you'd ever done. I mean, at least I know, for one, you know, you said you were never really a huge fan, but another thing is like that book has been filled with some seminal voices. Like there's people that have been on that book that are just like, you know, legends and everything. But
oh yeah,
I love the Punisher. I love your run on it. It's fantastic. How have you gotten over that feeling as you've moved along and like, you know, started to get deeper into the book?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's still challenging, but it's a different kind of challenge, I think, than, you know, anything else I've ever written. I mean, with each book comes its own challenges, but Punisher, not being too familiar with the character and then trying not to write him off as just like, you know, some lunk with a couple of guns. And, you know, it's just like, okay, well, who is this guy and why do we care about him? And why do people care about this character so much that I've never really connected with? But after like, you know, digging around, and my first thing, I was like, I want to take away his guns. Like that was my big thing when I pitched it to Marvel. And they're like, okay, well, you can do that, but you have to, don't do it right away. They're like, just give him a few issues to be like normal Punisher. And then like, then you can start like taking away his guns. So that's why he, the first 12 issues, he was slowly leaving New York. And the further he got from New York, the lower his ammunition supply got. You know, he lost his van. You know, he has no friends. He loses all his guns. He's got to use like bear traps and axes and stuff like chains to survive. So, you know, the fun stuff. So that was kind of interesting to get him out of his comfort zone and to kind of think of it more as a survival, like kind of Rambo thing.
Yeah.
And I'm also going at it like he's kind of like Jason Voorhees, except that he kills criminals instead of teenagers.
Yeah, summer camp goers.
Yeah, so thinking of him just as like, you know, he's not trying to save, he's not a superhero that's like, oh, I want to save New York City, or like, oh, I'm going to save, you know, the world. He's like, he wants to destroy. He's like, I am a force of destruction. I don't want to save anything. I just want to destroy the people who are destroying things. You know, it's just like a weird way to look at it. But once I started thinking of him like that, not as a hero necessarily, but, you know, as someone who just, like Jason Voorhees, just, you know, bull in a China stop, just straight through, killing people.
Yep.
Killing the bad guys. And I try to make the bad guys pretty despicable. That's kind of the fun part. So there's one coming up that I like finished and I got a little chill because I wrote like such a creepy old bad guy.
I do want to say I have to give you credit because one of the things you did in like the, God, I'm trying to remember what issue it was. Is like 5 or 6, and it was like he had been on a rampage and doing all this killing and everything like that. and he still takes a little girl for ice cream. I like that you actually like humanized him like a little bit, where it's
Yeah.
like there's still a person in there, but he's just so focused on this job, but he will be a person if the situation arises.
Yeah, exactly. He's like King Kong, you know? It's like, oh, he's this giant gorilla, but then you look into his eyes and you're like, oh no, he's just like me. Like, you know, you got to give him that like little bit of humanity, or otherwise he just goes too far and no one could relate with him. But I try to throw in every few issues, like he'll have a new like sidekick kind of character, you know. There's some fun ones coming up, but that's been the challenging thing is like the comics aren't really about him per se. It's about the people whose lives he affects, for better or for worse. And you know, how do you live in a city the Punisher lives in too? You know, because bad things can happen to you, but like, you know,
He
with
draws
the Punisher
attention.
coming through, oh yeah, it's ridiculous.
I want to ask about I know a lot of people who rave about this guy, but Jake Thomas was or at least initially, I think he still is the editor on the book.
Oh
And
yeah, he's been incredible. I've learned so much from working with him, and he puts up with so much of my guff.
I was going to ask, like, how I imagine, you know, initially you're having kind of the concerns about like approaching the book. How did he help you kind of get over that? Do you feel like he was a big part of like figuring out your voice on the book?
Oh, definitely, yeah, 100%. Because doing this kind of book for Marvel is totally new. And, you know, when I was working with DC, I was working with Brendan helping me co-write, and then, you know, Carl drawing it. He was actually helping to write too. We would all kind of jam on story ideas. But this is just me and the Punisher. And I, you know, completely, you're kind of thrown in the deep end, you know. And Jake was really, you know, everything I had a problem with. He helps me talk through the issues. You know, he'll give me so many different like if I get stuck on something, he'll throw out different ideas, or he'll, you know, sometimes it'll just come back with like, hey, I think you need to punch up the ending a little more, or like, you know, I think you need to refigure this scene out. So he's really good at going in and like finding the spots in my scripts that are a little bit weaker, and just, you know, going and like surgically being like, these pages, rethink that, and here's why. And, you know, he's always right, so I'll just do that. Who am I to argue with the editor?
Well, and I like with the no guns thing. I like that he kind of found, or I don't know, I presume it was him and somebody else perhaps that helped find a middle ground that wasn't like transitioning away from the guns because that's who people know, and then slowly getting there because it seems like it's working for you.
Yeah, well, he's back in New York and he's got the guns again. That was the first 12 issues was the, you know, the him leaving, and then there was a few like different things. I was like issue 5 or 6, he like crawled out of a grave.
Yes.
And it was kind of like this rebirth kind of thing where he's, you know, now he's like been born again literally from a grave. And then at the end, when he falls into the ice and everyone thinks that he's dead, it's like a second rebirth where, you know, he ends up coming back to the city with kind of a new view because he's had to, he left, he went so far and like, you know, he was after one guy and that guy got away. And so it was kind of like a release for him, I think. I don't think he's used to that, but between him and the different character, Ortiz, who's the DEA agent, they kind of had like a little back, but they're both after the same guy, but then they also were going at it from completely different angles. And Ortiz, you know, she lost her partner, Henderson. Poor Henderson, he didn't get a fair shot. You know, she had to deal with the thoughts of revenge, and she could have easily crossed the line and become like a Punisher herself. You know, she was there at the edge, and I think she looked in and decided it wasn't for her. And she was like, well, I operate within the confines of the law, and it's the two of them, you know, someone who's doing things on one side of the law and someone, you know, the Punisher who's obviously doing things outside the law, and how their paths kind of meet at the end and how they reconcile it, you know? And so I think that was the whole story arc that I pitched was basically that, you know, with a lot of blood, a lot more killing, but you know, the fun stuff.
So, one thing I wanted to ask you about, I just have a few more questions. I know you've been asked about your recent focus on writing to the point where you actually made a mini comic explaining your reasoning for it, which I thought was fantastic. It gets it all out there. People can look at it. It's great. But for listeners who don't know, what made you want to take a bit of a break from, full out interior work and focusing entirely on art to focus on writing for a bit?
Well, some of it was doing the mini comics. That was a huge thing, and realizing like I need to get better at writing because this is difficult. And some of it was after doing monthly books for so long, that you can only really work on one book at a time.
Right.
And once it's out there and then it's gone, it's like, it just made sense, like career wise, to be able to write, because then I could work on 2 or 3 books at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And, I can still do illustration work. I do a bunch of covers, and I work for Mondo now too. So that I can still keep up, my drawing chops.
Mm-hmm.
But it just, the monthly thing just got to be a lot. And sometimes it really does feel like you spend, a year or so working on a book, and then you put it out there in the world, and it makes a little like ripple, and then it's gone. And you're like, well, that was a year of my life, just not going out or having any friends, and destroying everything that I loved for the sake of this comic that nobody cares about. So that was part of it, was just feeling a little burnt out. I always felt like comics does take a lot from you.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of energy and effort, and it doesn't really give back that much, monetarily, or like it's very greedy. It's a greedy profession. And I always felt like if I didn't love it 100%, I wouldn't do it, because then I'd just become bitter,
mm-hmm.
And I do talk to people who have been doing what they've been doing for so long, but don't love it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell in the work, and I just didn't want to be that person. So I decided to write a little bit, take a step back, take a breather.
Yeah.
And it's helped. And now I'm, kind of stoked everything's kind of ending soon,
Yeah.
So, with Southern Cross, we were doing 3 books. So we've got like 5 more issues to do on that.
And the second trade is coming out this week, I think, right?
The second trade is coming out. Is it this week?
No, next week. It's next
week. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's the 19th. I can't remember. It's like the week before, by chance, or maybe it is the 12th. Anyway, it's coming out this month soon.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's coming out the 19th. Yeah. Volume 2 is the 19th. And then By Chance Providence is the following week. I think next week is Gotham Academy.
You have a big month.
There's a lot of books this month. I kind of lost track. Yeah, so Gotham Academy second semester volume 1 is coming out this month, and Southern Cross volume 2, and By Chance of Providence. So all that stuff. That's because I'm writing.
Yeah. Well, so 2 quick anecdotes. I had Chip Zdarsky on my podcast right before you. And
Chip is lovely.
He is very lovely. And we were talking about how, he was doing so much for sex criminals that writing actually gives him an outlet that'll kind of, it allows him to do something with the time that he has, that he's not doing literally everything that Matt's not doing on sex criminals. And it seems like it's kind of, he enjoys it. It gives him something else to kind of work on that kind of, I don't know, it maybe fights off that burnout. And I also had Nathan Fairbairn on recently, and he was talking about how he colored Seconds, Brian Lee O'Malley's Seconds. And he was talking about how like they worked on that book for like 3 years, and then it came out, and it kind of got attention for like a week or 2, and then it was kind of gone. And it was just kind of weird. Like you work on this for like 3 years is a not inconsiderable length of time for your life, and
it is your life.
Yeah,
for that amount of time that you're working on it.
Yeah,
and it's gone.
And that's crazy because people don't really think about that when they're looking at this book. They're like, "Oh, I read this. This was enjoyable." I'm like, "Well, that was 3 years of a person's life." It is kind of crazy when you think about it like
That's
that.
why I kind of like the short stories. It's like you can get in, you can do them, and then they're done.
Mm-hmm.
And then you don't have to work. You can just work on the next one. It's not an opus. I have an opus, a few opuses. Opuses. I have a few opuses in my head that maybe one day I'll get to do, but the thought of it is so daunting because of that very reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't want to get to the end and then find nothing, and it's just like that's scary. But I wanted to actually ask about your Mondo stuff really quick because I mentioned the Dark Phoenix poster earlier. You did a Ghost in the Shell one. You've done some other stuff. I think it's awesome. I think Mondo does amazing stuff. I bought an Idiocracy shirt from them that is fantastic.
Oh, they're great.
Yeah. Did you find that doing stuff like that, and also, doing like the covers for Southern Cross, has helped you kind of rebuild from that burnout and like kind of rediscover your love of art? I mean, not that you didn't love art, but kind of, I don't know, re-energize yourself to a degree?
Oh, totally. Yeah. It's a different kind of art too. When you're doing an illustration, you're telling a whole story with one single image versus a comic where it's a whole story with like 5 billion different images. So, it's a different muscles in your brain, using that, and then just getting more confident again, because before I was, a few years ago, I wasn't doing as much illustration. And although I was confident enough, like to a point, working with Mondo and working, because they employ so many incredible artists that I've gotten to know them all. And you really have to step your game up. And it's nice because now I've got this like kind of support group where if I'm having trouble with a composition or a face or a hand or something, it's like, what were the colors? I can just throw it up and be like, what do you guys think about this? Like,
That's cool.
And you're always going to get honest opinions. And it's kind of made me really, have to be better at illustration to be like on that level. And I still don't feel like I'm good enough, but I'm trying very hard.
Well, and you're working at it. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
So the last question I have before 5 questions is, I wanted to talk about something you said on Twitter a little bit ago that really caught my attention. You did this Twitter thread about how even if you can't draw, quote unquote, can't draw, you can still make a comic as long as you can get the story across. I think a lot of people have a problem with that. I think people look at somebody like, Jim Lee, you mentioned him earlier, and another person like that people look at as like Alex Ross. They're like, I can't do that. How could I ever be Alex Ross? But you don't need to be. How difficult and important of a lesson do you think it is for aspiring comic creators to know that, to learn that it's really about storytelling above all?
It's, if you don't know how to tell a story visually, you'll never be able to really write a comic. And you can look at, Bendis's career and trace his stuff back to like Goldfish and Jinx. And you can look at that art and say like, it was good, it was serviceable, but it wasn't, Alex Ross,
Yeah.
But he could tell a damn good story. And I think that comes across in his writing. He wouldn't be the strong writer that he is if he wasn't able to like do, to draw a comic. And so I just feel like, I read a short story years ago. I think it was a Free Comic Book Day story by Joel Pretty, and it really stuck with me. It was called The Amazing Life of Onion Jack. And Joel does amazing stuff. Is like very deceptively simple is a good way to describe it. It's like a stick figure comic, but it like made me cry, And here's the guy who's drawing his stick figures, and it's so good. And his characters are so emotive, even though they're just like a circle and a couple of squiggly lines. It was like such a touching story, and his, the balance between writing and art and his pacing and his layouts it was perfect. And that's, you don't have to be a really good draftsman. You just have to understand story. And I think the only way to do that is to make comics.
Yeah.
And if you let the fact that you think in your head that you can't draw because you don't draw like Alex Ross, then how else are you going to learn? It's just, you're just setting yourself up for failure by not doing it. And it's a bad excuse. It's a really bad excuse, is what I'm saying.
I mean, I'm this is in no way me saying that she's a bad artist, but one of my absolute favorite cartoonists is Kate Beaton, and Kate Beaton is not like a stylist by any means. Like, she's not somebody who's going to be like, having, I don't know, art gallery experience. She probably does because she's amazing. But I mean, like, you look at Harka Vagrant, and like that is just like her ability to like her comic timing, not to be punny or something, but her comic timing with her storytelling is so incredible that like, I don't know, she can make me laugh with like the most random things.
She's a great example of that because, her stuff is so honest and you get such a good feeling out of it. Like, I don't know, like she'll just draw an expression, it'll just make you laugh. And you don't even read what the comic says. It's just such a funny drawing. And I think that's a great example of, you have to, be smart. And, if you're afraid that no one's going to like your comic because you can't draw, then like, people don't like my art all the time everywhere. And you can't let that stop you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like everyone's going to have different tastes. That's one of the funny things about comics. I mean, it's the same thing for any artistic medium, but it's like so much of it is subjective that the style part you have to you don't have to ignore it, but you have to like realize that it's not everything.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a hard thing too, like growing up and going to SVA and stuff and being in college, you're just always concerned with like, oh, what's my style? Like, how do I draw? Like, so and so draws like this, and like, such and such draws like that. What's me? How do I draw? And you're just constantly putting way too much thought into something that's just like, well, if you just let it happen, then your style is just going to come naturally, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. So that's a perfect transition. I want to talk 5 quick questions about not any, really your work, just really kind of you as in general. And I want to start with your School of Visual Arts experience because you went to school with Tomer Hanuka, you went to school with Farrell Dalrymple, James Jean, Nate Powell. That is a murderer's row of amazing artists and cartoonists.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Even then, I knew it.
Yeah.
Like I called him James Genius. He was so good. He's still really good, but it was like people that right away. You're just like, they are just really, really good, and it's all you can do to like keep up with them.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of curious. You kind of mentioned this to a certain degree with the Mondo stuff. Do you find? I'm always curious with artists. Do you find that you're competitive with your art, and that like going to school with people like that and working with people like the people you do at Mondo drives you to like want to take your own stuff to the next level?
Oh, totally. Yeah, 100%. I'm very competitive with my art, but I don't think I'm competitive in like a mean-spirited way.
Right.
I never feel like if someone gets a job and I don't, I've never felt like I've lost out. I feel like they deserve it because, it's them and not me.
It drives you, but
sense?
you're not petty.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's competitive in a way where you see someone do something great. And although you don't want to draw exactly like that, it just makes you inspired to do something, to strive for the same greatness that all your friends are seeming to achieve and you're not.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I imagine too, seeing like the way that somebody like James or like Nate or whomever approaches something, it might open up something like I hadn't even thought about doing that. Like you were talking about Carl earlier, where he the different perspectives on going up the stairs. Like that might be something you wouldn't consider until you saw that.
Oh yeah, like I got so many good pointers back. Even now, I was talking to Kevin Tong, who does phenomenal poster work, and he just would like basically opened up his Photoshop file and was like, here's how I do my layers. Here's how I do my brushes. Here's how I get these great dithers. And I'm like, oh man, like the only way you can get that information is by being, wanting to learn.
Right.
So, and even back in college, I remember talking to James about, I don't know, I don't remember how it came up, but he was talking about how he gets his colors. And he's like, oh, I just look at photographs with colors that I like and kind of just zoom in and like pick different colors from like an area that I like. And I was like, it's genius. It's so smart. Why didn't I think of that? It's stuff like that,
Yeah, absolutely. That actually is a perfect transition to my next question, which is I read an interview with you where you named Paradise Lost, Fritz Lang, and Joseph Clement Cole as influences to varying degrees to you as an artist, and none of those are comic book creators, obviously.
Right.
How important do you think it is for comic artists to look outside of just comics for influences?
Oh, I think it's so important. And I've always felt like that. I think in going to college, going to SVA was like a huge thing because you're all of a sudden exposed to. I grew up in New Hampshire, and it was there was nothing really there. There's a lot of trees, but as far as culture goes, you're not going to find too much. So going to New York, you have all these different galleries, like modern galleries, and amazing old buildings, and you've got the Morgan Library, and you've got the Met, and you've got MoMA and the Guggenheim, and it was just every weekend you're at a different gallery looking at art or watching old films or going to the opera, and you're just soaking up all this different experiences that you didn't have before. And I think that's what makes, that's what's going to inform your art is the experiences that you have and being able to soak it all up and then kind of regurgitate it. Not to say just that you have to copy everything that you see, but it's all going to be in your head. And, one day, a few years down the road, you'll think of that, production of Don Giovanni that you saw. And it was like, oh man, that was really cool. And all of a sudden you've got this new piece that's inspired by something that you haven't thought about in years. And, that stuff is really important. And especially, I think to create something because you're learning all the rules, and then to start breaking them too, and like learning what works and what doesn't work, because it's, you know, it's a lot of rules.
I thought the Fritz Lang one in particular was pretty cool because it's like that's kind of like I mean Metropolis obviously is like a big deal, but I mean that's kind of a deep pull for somebody, you know, in like this era. Like a lot of I would imagine the vast majority of people who are listening have not seen like M or Metropolis or anything like that, but seeing like I don't know, it's pretty cool that you took things and you can apply that to your actual art.
Oh yeah, like I feel like everything I've done is you could basically look at a Fritz Lang movie and find I've like stolen everything from him. A lot of the German expressionist films like F.W. Murnau, and I think there's something about that black and white, like that stark look and the imagery, like the heavily constructed sets, and it's really stylized. The makeup, the props, it's just something about that era of film really speaks to me.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So this is a huge transition. I don't know why, whenever I do these 5 questions, it always comes up to about food, because I think I just love food. And you've lived in Montreal, you've lived in New York, and you've lived in Austin, all of which are culinary capitals of the continent. While I'm sure it would be difficult to sign your own home, your current home, I have to ask, which of the 3 had the best food in your experience?
Oh, that's really difficult. I can't decide. It's all different kind of food.
It's so
too,
different.
I think,
It's so different.
I'm gonna have to say I think I probably had some of my favorite meals in New York, but I think that's only because there's so many different types of food there, you know. And
Right.
I also lived in New York for like 14 years, so I had a lot more chance to like go out and explore the city. And every other week, like a restaurant's closing and opening, so. And I also, at the time, I was going out of my way to try a lot more different restaurants and stuff. And up in Montreal, I had some incredible food too, but you'd always end up eating at the same spots. Every once in a while, go to like a new place, but for the most part, in Montreal, I was very much a creature of habit and like, you know, going to the same greasy spoons or doing the same spots for lunch and stuff like that. I wasn't exploring the city as much as I probably should have.
My wife is from San Antonio, and one of the things that really draws her ire is that I've seen articles where they say that the best barbecue is in New York, and like Texans get so upset about that. They're like, no, best barbecue is in Texas. And,
I can't even. Yeah, I don't know. I don't eat too much meat, and I'm not a barbecue fan, so I don't know. I'm just, you know, sometimes it's not so bad, but then you just end up with like a giant plate of meat, and you're just like, I don't even really want this.
Yeah, and sometimes you can feel bad afterwards. It's just like too much.
Oh yeah, the sweats, they're real. It's horrible.
Very much so. So I wanted to ask one more question about Austin. It's loaded with killer comic shops. Actually, in December, when my wife and I were visiting in-laws, I actually toured a bunch of them, and they have fantastic shops. What is your favorite if you had to pick one?
Okay, definitely Austin Books and Comics. It's not only is it super close to me, everyone who works there is really rad. They do like ladies' nights and stuff. I know a lot of comics do, but it's nice. Really well, you know, it's a big store. It's really clean, and I'm signing there on the 26th.
Oh,
so that's cool.
Perfect.
Yeah, I know. Look at that segue.
Austin Cities or the Austin Books is like one of I would say maybe my favorite shop I've ever been to.
Yeah, it is definitely like a crown jewel of comic stores, and I'm really happy that it's in the city.
Yeah, the displays they have in the back for like the artist edition. I live in Anchorage, Alaska, where I don't think we really get artist editions, and so seeing them all like that, which just blew me away. I was like, I don't know, for a comic fan, it's such a, I don't know, utopian experience kind of.
Yeah, it's laid out really well, and they have a ton of different, like anything that you're looking for, they'll have or they'll be able to get. They've got a really good like European section. You know, they've got some great art books, even like the statues. And then right next door, they've got like an art gallery. And then next to that, I think it's called Guzzo. And then next to that, they've got like a game store where you can just buy like all your gaming stuff, from like tabletop games to RPGs and things. It's really cool.
Yeah, Guzzo is really cool. We actually bought a bunch of stuff in there too, because my wife is a huge like Final Toys fan.
Yeah.
But so the last question I have for you, I'm very curious as to what your answer is going to be for this. You know, you're kind of focused on writing right now. I can't imagine you listening to a lot of metal while writing. What do you listen to while you're writing? What is your favorite? What's your pick when you're diving into a script?
Um, I do sometimes listen to metal. I work in silence a lot lately for whatever reason. I've just kind of enjoy the sounds of, I don't know, the construction that's going on next door, I guess. I don't know. I listen to some like ambient stuff and electronic stuff, and there is a lot of metal. You know, I can't listen to anything with lyrics that I can really understand.
Right.
So a lot of the stuff that I listen to, if it's like black metal, then you can't understand it anyway. So that doesn't really get in the way. And it kind of helps for stuff like Punisher if you're listening to like a really aggressive music.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Anything, if it's got too many words that I can hear, if it becomes like an earworm, or lyrics that I know, I need something that I can put on and just have it be there in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it becomes like, you know, a little like white noise or something. You know, you put it on and you've been listening to the same song like on repeat for, 30 minutes and you just haven't realized it.
I'm probably going to horribly butcher this band's name, but one of my favorite bands to listen to while I work is Sigur Rós or Sigur Rós. Mm-hmm. Even though there's lyrics, it doesn't bother me because it's in a fictional language and I don't even know what they're saying anyways.
Yeah, exactly. They're from like
Iceland.
Is it Iceland?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're really good. There's another band called Wardruna that I really like, and it's a few guys I think from Gorgoroth, I think, and they do it's like traditional Norwegian instruments. It's all Norwegian. I think they actually do the soundtrack to Vikings, if I'm not mistaken. Awesome. But it's really, it's good writing music. It's good. It's kind of moody. It's a little like, it's kind of like almost like You Got It in the World section of the record store, but it's like a little cooler than that,
Yeah. That's awesome. Well,
I'll rock some Enya, though. I'm not ashamed.
You'll rock some what?
Enya.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. I'm really glad that people actually don't see what I'm listening to while I work, because it is, for the most part, it's like movie scores and it's like classical music. But sometimes I get some random stuff in there just because for some reason it's motivating me at the time. But Enya could definitely be there.
Oh, yeah. And Clannad, Enya's first band. Yeah, you got to check that out.
I didn't even know Enya was in a band.
Oh, yeah. It's called Clannad, and they're amazing. You're welcome. You can thank me later.
I'm going to have to check that out. But Becky, Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. This is fun.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Becky Cloonan. You can find her on Twitter at Becky Cloonan, on her website at beckycloonan.net, and her work in the re-release of By Chance or Providence at Image, Southern Cross, and The Punisher. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Dan Lee, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Chris Somney, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kesslake, Brian Dickerson, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mayle, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Johan Barander, Colin McMahon, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Matt Battaglia, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. Quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.